Okay, welcome everyone to today's edition of the Editor is in podcast. My name is Anthony James, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Marriage and Family Review. Again, welcome to today's episode of The Editor is In. Today we are talking about the value of being a reviewer. And to introduce herself, I'm going to pass the virtual mic to my guest.
Hi, my name is Amity Noltemeyer. I am professor and chair in the Educational Psychology Department at Miami University, and I also serve as editor-in-chief of School Psychology International Journal, which is a SAGE publication. So I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's get started. I have provided a list of 5 questions that will guide our discussion, and let's just start with the first one. So, what is the value of reviewing from the perspective of a scholar? Of course, we want to acknowledge that there certainly is a value to us as reviewers, but what can scholars gain in terms of value from being reviewers of manuscripts?
Sure, that's a great question. And I know I've gained a lot myself as a scholar doing reviews. So I think first, it really does help the scholar to see research of various types and qualities. So not only are you learning topics in your discipline by reading the manuscripts, so you're seeing the most recent literature out there, the most recent methodologies, those sorts of things, but you're also learning about different ways to study topics and different writing styles that may be effective or may not work so well, different ways to organize findings or think about limitations of work. So I think in that regard, it really helps just to expose you to a wide range of different types of submissions and scholarship. In some journals, reviewers do receive the decision letters. So after you complete a review, depending on the journal, you may actually get the decision letter from the editor that includes all 3 or 2, however many there are, reviewers' feedback in it, as well as the editor's decision. And in those cases, I do think that's a great opportunity to learn more from other reviewers. I know when I received those types of decision letters and I've looked at my own feedback that I provided and looked at the other reviewers' feedback, oftentimes I learned ways that they were looking at the paper that I was not, maybe things that I missed, or ways that I could be a more effective reviewer, or the opposite. Sometimes maybe I, learned things about my reviews that maybe were helpful that I didn't realize. And it also helps, I think, as a scholar to see, when you do get to see the decision letter, to see how the editor maybe reconciled findings and recommendations that might be different from different reviewers. So in that regard, I think it really can help as well. And then I also think, for faculty who are in roles where they might be going up for tenure or promotion and have expectations for professional service, obviously that, reviewing for journals looks favorable on those promotion applications typically. And it also can lead to professional connections with editors or other editorial board members that could be helpful later on. In my experience as an editor, oftentimes if I have a reviewer who does multiple high quality reviews, I will consider them for an editorial board position. So that might be another benefit to reviewing for a journal if you would like to become more involved on an editorial board. And certainly not all editors may reach out in that way, but if you have done several reviews for a journal and you are interested in a position like that, it certainly doesn't hurt to reach out to the editor to ask, to express your interest and ask how the editorial board is comprised and how you would express your interest. And then I do think there is just some value in knowing that you're helping other authors and the editor and ultimately the consumers of this research, because more and more in many journals, there's an increase in the number of submissions, and it sometimes is a challenge to find reviewers. And that has a trickle-down effect to, if the authors, if we aren't able to find reviewers and there's a delay in that, then there's a delay in the publication process for the authors, and then ultimately could be a delay in getting that important research out there to the public. And so I just think, just the value of knowing that you are kind of helping to get new knowledge out there, I think it definitely doesn't hurt. It's a bonus. So
yeah, it's sort of like you're joining a conversation. Now
right.
This is an academic or scholarly conversation, but you become part of it because you are helping to guide that discussion in some way by providing that feedback.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Yeah, so that's the reviewing. Let's take maybe a step back and ask, what are some ways that a given scholar's training may impact the extent to which they review for academic journals? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one important way is the degree to which the scholar had the opportunity in their graduate program to be mentored in reviewing or mentored in the peer review process more generally. So I know when I was in my doctoral program, I had a professor who, when she would get a review a couple of times, she asked the editor, would it be okay to have a doctoral student assist her with the review as an ad hoc reviewer, and got permission for that. And then I was able to, she provided me with the manuscript and we both read it individually. We both wrote up our thoughts, and then we came together and discussed it, and kind of she modeled how to write a good review, and we worked on it together and did that a couple of times, which I think was probably a very important training opportunity for me. So I think that if you had that opportunity, or if you are currently a graduate student and would like that opportunity, I'd encourage you to reach out to, a faculty member, see if there's a possibility to get that type of training. I also do think that a scholar's experience in submitting their own publications also does have an impact on the extent to which they might review in a couple of ways. I mean, not only do you just become more knowledgeable about the peer review process and by submitting your own work and seeing how that process plays out, you also realize how important reviewers' feedback is and how much it can be helpful or could be hurtful if it's not, very constructive in the criticism. But also, when you submit as an author, when you submit through one of these online portals, typically when you submit as an author, unless you opt out, oftentimes your name and contact information and areas of expertise might be stored, and then editors can then use that to search for people with certain expertise to invite to review. So if you have submitted work to a journal, it might be possible, unless you've opted out or they don't do it that way, that you're kind of in a reviewer pool, an ad hoc reviewer pool that could be searched from and invited for future review opportunities. And then, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so picking your keywords is important.
Right. It is important. From an editor's perspective, think really hard about those keywords, and please, try to put them in. I think it is helpful because, certainly a generalist reviewer is fine. Not everyone that reviews an article has to be an expert in that subject or that methodology necessarily. But it does help to know. I think it helps. It's more helpful to the reviewer in the experience if they do have a connection to the topic or the methodology, and also the feedback that is received is usually more helpful too. So those keywords really do matter, I would agree. And then, I guess I would just say also in terms of training, I do think, your training in certain types of research methodologies might impact your likelihood of reviewing for particular journals. So for example, if you really haven't received any training in single subject design research or very limited training in qualitative research, you might receive fewer invitations or be less likely to accept invitations for articles or journals that really specialize in those types of methods. So I think some of it just goes back to the training that you've had in your graduate program.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that process sort of helps you become a good reviewer. And in a past podcast, the editor talks about sort of the overarching, because ultimately you want to help the reviewer, but also you're assisting the editor, right, to make a decision. And while we're not saying that, style doesn't matter, but that's really not the main thing we're looking at, right? And so that's a part of the process too, of like what exactly or how are they reviewing, to learn that process. And any thoughts on that?
Exactly. So yeah, I think in terms of, can you ask that question one more time? I want to make sure.
Yeah, sorry. It's just what exactly are you looking for, from a reviewer if it's a good review? What are some, tips for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a good review, first of all, a good review definitely, in my experience, highlights what some of the strengths are of the manuscript. I always get disappointed if it's always just a laundry list of problems. I think even in a manuscript that's maybe not perfect, there usually are things that are strong about it, or that could be relative strengths that you could, emphasize. So I always like to start with some of those. And then go into the constructive feedback. And certainly, good review is direct and real clear about the issues or concerns or questions that they have. I tend to like it when a review gives some actionable feedback. So rather than just, you know, there wasn't enough research cited, maybe the reviewer might have some more specific details, like, you know, I was wondering, you know, it would be helpful if you cited more research on this, or this is what I found to be missing. And so, so I think that that's always helpful. And I think it is helpful, from my experience as an editor, it is helpful if the reviewer does acknowledge the limits of their expertise. So for example, if someone doesn't mention anything about the data analysis, as an editor, it might not be clear if the person didn't have concerns with it, or if they just aren't, they don't have training in that particular data analysis technique. So I find it to be helpful if a reviewer says, you know, I actually am not, I don't have experience or knowledge about this particular data analysis technique, so I can't comment on that part of the manuscript. So my recommendation would be to comment on kind of all the major sections of the manuscript in some way, just so that an omission of a comment doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't concerns, but if it's clear that maybe that's just a section that, based on the person's background, they weren't able to review. I think that can be helpful. And I always think just ending a review with a hopeful note that, you know, even if it's not a manuscript that the reviewer is recommending to the editor for publication, certainly encouraging, like, you know, for example, maybe it's not a manuscript that you believe would be suitable for this journal at this time, because it's more of a preliminary pilot study, but, you know, here's an idea to think about for the future that might be better suited for this journal, or that sort of thing, to kind of give, you know, a sense of hope at the end, even if it's not a paper that is being recommended for acceptance in the journal. So those are just some of my personal things. I will say that, you know, in terms of learning how to do good reviews, there are some useful guides out there, checklists. There's even a book I have that I bought that I sometimes refer to, that's got, you know, just kind of questions based on different methodologies or things that you might want to be thinking about as a reviewer that can be helpful. Even some of the publishing companies kind of have their own reviewing guidance documents of just, you know, things to think about in doing a high quality review. So I would recommend that if you are newer to reviewing and you feel like you need some models, to kind of look out for those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you mind sharing the title of that book?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't have it right now, but
It's
I will
okay.
email you.
Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll put it on the website when this
Perfect.
goes up. So because I'm pretty sure someone's going to say, hey, I wonder what that book is. So
Yep, I will
be sure to
get it to you.
provide that.
It's
Okay.
sitting on a bookshelf, so I will get it.
Fair enough. All right, so let's pivot just a little bit. One of the things I've come into knowledge about is the diversity of reviewers, the pool of reviewers. And so I just would like your perspective on, are there barriers to becoming reviewers based on issues of diversity or some, you know, characteristic that a person has?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are. There was a 2020 study by Roberts and colleagues that looked at 50 years of peer-reviewed research across a sample of psychology journals. And they found that, you know, most editors were white, and that 75% of journals' editorial board members were white in the journals that they analyzed. So clearly, you know, that's just specifically with regard to race, but with regard to many aspects of diversity, there's certainly a lot of room for improvement. And certainly historically, there have been many ways that discrimination based on issues of diversity has impacted the research process in many ways, you know, including not only which topics are included or excluded in journals, what types of methodologies are viewed as, you know, acceptable, authorship decisions, just editorial board composition, all of that. So yeah, absolutely. I think that there are barriers. I think that, you know, some journals are really committing to really trying to improve in that area. I know as an international journal that I edit, we've tried really hard to kind of keep focus on the editorial board and make sure that we have diverse representation from different countries, different cultural backgrounds, that sort of thing. But it's certainly an ongoing process. And certainly, since, you know, oftentimes the way that someone gets started in this is sort of sometimes through word of mouth at times. I think, you know, someone on the board may know someone else who's interested in reviewing. And so I think that can lead to situations where individuals from marginalized backgrounds may not necessarily receive the same opportunities as others. So I do think we need to be really intentional about issues of diversity, because we all know that both unconscious and conscious bias and other things can impact the peer review process from start to finish. And so, ensuring that we have a diverse pool of reviewers, a diverse editorial board, diverse leadership is obviously really important. And then another barrier that I see in my work sometimes is a language barrier, because it is an international journal and many journals are only published in one language. There are exceptions, of course, but that can make it challenging also for scholars who aren't proficient in that language to become involved as reviewers in the journal. So yeah, I think there's a lot of issues, and I'm hopeful that more and more journals will continue to commit to trying to address issues of diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. My journal has an international audience, and it's forced me to look in other countries for scholars in this field. Honestly, more so than I had done before. For that reason, that I'm sensitive to making sure that the population or sample under study, that someone reviewing it has some knowledge on it, because there are sometimes things that come up that are totally outside of my perspective in terms of, like, I don't know the culture on the ground for this particular group, and it's forced me to build up a wider review pool of individuals, to where I've even
Yes.
placed in my review invitation, like, I noticed that you have expertise in this particular cultural group. You may not understand the topic much, but can you at least let me know if the cultural pieces are correct, or if something is missing? Yeah. So, any thoughts?
Exactly. I absolutely agree. I 100% agree with that. And one thing that we're working on right now is in the final stages of drafting an editorial board survey that looks at what expertise the editorial board members have in terms of, philosophical paradigms, methodologies. For example, if there's a manuscript that comes in and it's based on critical race theory, and we're not sending that manuscript to reviewers who understand that paradigm, we're going to get a completely different type of perspective on that. And so keywords matter again, but not everyone puts in their keywords when we're searching for reviewers or searching for people to handle those manuscripts. We don't always know, is someone familiar with indigenous methods, or is someone familiar with, other things? And so, I'm hoping to get a better sense of, what the different backgrounds and expertise of the different editorial board members and reviewers are. We'll see. We haven't launched the survey yet, but I agree. It's important to have at least someone reviewing the manuscript who understands the cultural context or the framework that or paradigm that's being used in the research.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually brings up another issue of reviewers have a responsibility to be honest, and their keyword searches don't put something that you're really not familiar in, because you could be approving a paper that has consequences for, in your case, school processes or policies. In my case, is family processes and policies, and there's a great responsibility. It's an honor, but also there can be some consequences. So yeah, so I appreciate you saying that.
That's a really good point. That if as a reviewer, you ever get an invitation for a manuscript that you just don't feel comfortable reviewing, because you don't really have the perspective or framework to review that, it is okay to decline. And there often is a opportunity in many of these systems, if you do decline an invitation, to recommend another reviewer. So I would recommend to those of you out there listening who, might get an invitation, it's not really aligned with your interests or expertise, you don't really feel comfortable providing a review on that. Think of, are there others that perhaps early career scholars or others who have more of interest aligned with that topic or expertise aligned with that topic, who you could maybe recommend, as a potential reviewer to the editor. And that way you're still contributing in some way, even if you feel that it's outside of the scope of your practice or your knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Okay, let's pivot a little bit. You did talk about giving junior scholars or younger scholars a chance to review. something that people may not be aware of is that we as editors have we see a score for previous reviewers, right? Um, do you offer them multiple chances? Because we do see some low scores, and that could be for a variety of reasons. So let me just stop there and say, how do
Yeah.
you
So,
address
so
that?
first of all, yeah, no, it's a great question. And first of all, I'll clarify that our journal system actually does not provide score. We don't do the score.
Okay.
I know many journals do. Um, so, but oftentimes if there is I definitely think it is editors should give early career scholars a chance to review. I think it's really important. Oftentimes I've found early career scholars do very, very good reviews because they're very eager to get into the work and they spend a lot of time on it. But certainly there may be people who just didn't have that mentoring, who didn't have that experience and aren't sure, maybe their first review isn't great. What I often do is if it's a new, let's say it is someone who brand new to reviewing, let's say, if our journal requires two peer reviews, let's say, I would invite them as a third reviewer, or if it requires 3 reviews, I'd invite them as a fourth reviewer the first time, just to see, because it's always okay to have an extra review, but that way, if for whatever reason, it isn't the type of review that really provides the information you need. It's an extra one. You still have other reviews. In my experience, most of them do really good work. But if I would say it's upon the editor to, if I did have someone who submitted a review, they were eager to do so, but it wasn't the type of review that is helpful, or it clearly just didn't provide high quality constructive feedback, then what I might do is, reach out to that person and thank them for the opportunity to review, and to say that, since they are a first time reviewer, sometimes I like to provide some feedback and ideas and talk through the review process with them, how like what a typical review process would look like with our journal, and see if they'd be open to that. I know I've had one person who wanted to be a reviewer for the journal, and she said, after I do my first review, would you meet with me to talk with me about how my review was and what I could do better? And I just thought that was great. I mean, I would be happy to talk with people about that. Certainly not every editor might have time for that, but I do think it's worth a chance, especially if they're interested in reviewing, like take that opportunity. And I think it's a great opportunity. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this brings up a philosophical issue of our roles in the science as editors, and how do you help usher in that next wave of scholars who are going to take the science, in some other direction, or continue it, whatever it is. And so the extent to which we can, be generative in that way by providing those opportunities, providing that feedback, because this can create a disparity if someone's first review as a second year doc student impacts them from the journal, for many years. That can be
right.
problematic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one idea that we've been looking into but haven't yet settled on is the idea some journals do have a graduate student editorial board, and in the graduate student editorial board, maybe, for example, one of them that we looked at as an example, there maybe an editorial board member or a reviewer is like mentoring a student on the graduate student review board, editorial board. And so I do agree. I think it is important to think about ways that we can kind of, help foster this in the next generation of scholars, is particularly underrepresented scholars. So I agree. We haven't come to a decision on that, but I think that it is important to maybe systematically figure out how to offer some more opportunities for mentoring of early career and or graduate student scholars.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fairness, it is a lot of work, and journal editing is a lot of work, and
Yes.
it takes a lot of time and resources. So I want to be fair to our fellow editors, that this takes a lot of time, and a time when institutions don't support editors like they have in the past. So hopefully that doesn't sound like an excuse for not doing something, but hopefully just a reminder to offer editors some grace if they're not able to do all of the things that Harveen mentioned here, because it does take quite a bit of
Right.
time.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, every journal has its priorities, and we can't all do everything. So I think just figuring out, what seems most important, and trying to move forward with that. And again, some of these ideas that I've mentioned are things that we're just starting with and trying to figure out how to move forward with. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I would like to offer you the chance if you have any last minute things you would like to share with the audience today, and give you opportunity to say that before we wrap up.
No, I think this was really great. The only thing I would add is that if you are out there listening and you're interested in reviewing for a journal, don't hesitate to reach out to an editor or the editorial assistant, whoever's listed on the website, to indicate your interest. If there is a journal that you'd be really interested in reviewing for, I think, and I would just encourage you to participate in reviewing. I think it could be helpful. Certainly you can't accept every invitation that you get to review, but I do think it is a nice opportunity to, provide some service and learn in ways that might benefit your own research.
Yes, absolutely. And I would add to that, this is a conversation that you can also have with your mentor and asking them which sort of journals within your field more align with the type of research you're doing and things of that nature. Those are helpful ways to help usher you into the field. So with that, I want to make sure I thank my guest. You've been listening to the Editors In podcast, and so my guest, Dr. Noltemeyer, thank you for joining us today. This podcast will be available on our website, where you will find a short bio on Dr. Noltemeyer and a link to her journal website. So check us out, subscribe, like, and all of the things on social media that you do to follow content. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to join me and offer some perspectives for our community. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you too. And thanks for joining everyone. Have a wonderful day.